Mid-13th century. The Abbasid Caliphate, which in its heyday occupied a vast territory from the Iberian Peninsula to Central Asia, is experiencing a period of decline. After the loss of vast territories under the control of the Caliph, only the interflow of the Euphrates and Tigris rivers remained. The fact that the ruling Caliph al-Mustasim in Baghdad deserves special mention was considered the leader of all Muslims, but at the same time he did not control the main Islamic shrines in Mecca and Medina, since they were located on the territory of the Mamluk Sultanate. Nevertheless, the Caliph had enormous wealth at his disposal, and the capital of the Caliphate was one of the most populous cities in the world, in which science and the arts developed rapidly. Thus, despite the fact that the Caliphate occupied many times less territory than during its heyday, it is a fairly rich country that was able to protect its borders from its neighbors. But unfortunately for the Caliph, a huge threat in the form of the Mongol army was rapidly approaching the borders of his state. Already in 1236, the Mongol army managed to conquer the state of the Khwarezm Shahs, after which Mongol troops almost immediately began to test the strength of the defenses of the Abbasid Caliphate. In the same year, the Mongol army besieged the city of Erbil. However, due to lack of forces and the lack of siege engines, the Mongols did not attempt to storm Erbil and, after a short siege, having plundered the outskirts of the city, they returned to their territory. In 1237, Mongol troops again invaded the territory of the Abbasid Caliphate and, destroying everything in their path, without encountering serious resistance, they were able to reach the outskirts of the capital of the Caliphate, the city of Baghdad. From that time on, Mongol troops carried out annual raids deep into the territory of the Abbasid Caliphate. This, of course, was not a full-scale invasion, but the Mongol troops not only explored the territory of the Caliphate, but also, by destroying everything in their path, undermined its economy. Of course, the Caliph was not satisfied with this development of the situation and, having gathered the forces of the army of the Caliphate, in 1245 he managed to destroy part of the Mongol troops, but of course this victory simply could not weaken the power of the Mongol army. After the conquest of the Khwarezm Shah's state, the Mongols began to fight against the Nizari Ismailis, better known as the Order of Assassins. Hulagu, who commanded the Mongol army in the region, demanded that the Caliphate take part in the fight against the assassins, since they posed a threat to all states in the region. The Caliph initially agreed, as he planned not only to get rid of the threat of the assassins, but also to establish good relations with the Mongol Empire, but the Caliph's advisors persuaded him to refuse to send troops against the assassins, since they believed that in this way the Mongols simply wanted to weaken the defense of Baghdad. It deserves special mention that some Sunni sources claim that the vizier of Baghdad, Muhammad ibn al-Alqami, who was a Shiite, betrayed the Caliph and began negotiations with Hulagu behind his back. How it was actually unknown, but the army of the Abbasid Caliphate did not advance to help the Mongols in their fight against the assassins. However, the Mongols did an excellent job of destroying the Order of Assassins without outside help, after which they began developing plans to conquer the Abbasid Caliphate. Meanwhile, in 1256, the Abbasid Caliphate suffered a devastating flood that caused serious damage to the economy. The Caliph's problems did not end there, since immediately after the flood, clashes began between the Sunnis and Shiites living on the territory of the Caliphate, which of course weakened the Abbasid army on the eve of the Mongol invasion. Hulagu was well aware of the problems facing the Abbasid Caliphate, so in September 1257 he began correspondence with Caliph al-Mustasim. Hulagu convinced the Caliph to voluntarily submit and send the vizier, the commander of the army of the Caliphate and the chief judge of the Caliphate, Dawdar, to the Mongol camp for negotiations. In turn, the Caliph sent 3 less important officials for negotiations, who informed Hulagu that in the event of an invasion by the Mongol army, the entire Islamic world would stand under the banner of the Caliph. It is unknown whether the Caliph really believed that all the Islamic armies would come to his aid or simply wanted to intimidate Hulagu, but nevertheless he agreed to pay a small tribute to the Mongols, expecting that in return they would stop making ruinous raids on the territory of the Caliphate. Correspondence between Hulagu and the Caliph continued, but they naturally failed to reach an agreement, since the Mongols did not want to give up plans to subjugate the Abbasid Caliphate, and the Caliph, in turn, did not plan to voluntarily recognize vassalage to the Mongol Empire. Realizing that continuing the correspondence would lead nowhere, Hulagu began preparations for a military campaign with the goal of conquering Baghdad and the entire Abbasid Caliphate. Before the invasion of the territory of the Abbasid Caliphate, under the command of Hulagu there was a huge army, which, in addition to the Mongols, included detachments from the Cilician and Georgian kingdoms, as well as Turkic and Persian warriors. In addition, to destroy the fortifications of Baghdad, Chinese engineers were present in the Mongol army to service the siege engines. The exact size of the Mongol army is unfortunately not known, but with a high degree of probability it can be said that Hulagu had at least 100,000 soldiers under his command. As for the Abbasid Caliphate, for the defense of Baghdad, about 50,000 soldiers were concentrated in the city, who, relying on the city fortifications, hoped to protect the capital of the Caliphate from the Mongols. A Mongol army under the command of Hulagu invaded the Abbasid Caliphate in early December 1257. Having not encountered serious resistance on December 6, the Mongols stormed and plundered the city of Kermanshah, whose garrison refused to surrender without a fight. After the sack of Kermanshah, Hulagu convened a military council, at which a plan was developed to capture Baghdad. It is important to understand that at that time Baghdad was one of the largest cities in the world whose fortifications, although damaged after the flood, were still a serious obstacle to the Mongol army. The Mongol army split into three parts and continued moving towards Baghdad. Baiju, who commanded the right flank of the Mongol army, was supposed to cross the Tigris River in the Mosul area and begin moving south towards Baghdad. At the same time, Kibuka, who commanded the left flank of the Mongol army, was supposed to cross the Tigris River south of Baghdad and ensure the encirclement of the city from the southwest. Meanwhile, Hulagu, together with the main forces, was supposed to attack the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate from the east. By mid-January 1258, the army under the command of Baiju reached the banks of the Nahr Isa Canal. Having set up camp near the canal, Baiju, deciding to give his army a rest, sent an advance detachment towards Baghdad to reconnoiter the area. On January 16, the vanguard of the Mongol army, about 40 kilometers from the walls of Baghdad, encountered a 20,000-strong Abbasid army commanded by Daudar. Thanks to the numerical advantage of the army of the Caliphate, they were able to defeat the advanced detachments of the Mongols and begin their pursuit, which continued until nightfall. In the vicinity of the canal, the Abbasids decided to stop the persecution and, having set up a camp, began to celebrate the victory over the Mongols. At night, on the orders of Baiju, the Mongols destroyed the dam and the released streams of water flooded the camp of the Abbasid army. Many Abbasid warriors drowned, and early in the morning the Baiju army finished off almost all the survivors. Only a few survivors, among whom was Daudar, could return to Baghdad. Having won the victory, Baiju continued to move forward towards the walls of Baghdad. By January 22, 1258, Mongol forces from three sides reached the outskirts of Baghdad and surrounded the city. The fact that as soon as Hulagu and his army reached the eastern outskirts of the city, the local Shiites welcomed him and offered no resistance deserves special mention. Having surrounded the city, the Mongols in just a few days dug a ditch around the besieged Baghdad in order to deprive its defenders of the opportunity to escape from the encirclement. The Mongols also built pontoon bridges on the Tigris River, which not only allowed for communication between the three Mongol armies, but also prevented the garrison from leaving Baghdad by water. Having completed all the preparatory work, the Mongol army began an assault on the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate on January 30, 1258. The fact that immediately before the assault, the Mongols sent a message to the city in which they guaranteed the safety of Christians, as well as those Muslims who would not resist the Mongols, deserves special mention. On the morning of February 1, on the third day of the assault, the Mongols managed to make a hole in the southeastern part of the city wall. Mongol troops immediately poured into this gap, but their path was blocked by the defenders of Baghdad. Since the gap was small and its protection at the initial stage was provided by the most combat-ready units of the Abbasids, they managed to repel the first onslaught of the Mongols. Having regrouped, the Mongols continued their attacks, planning to break into the city through a gap in the wall. The bloody hand-to-hand battle continued for several days, but already on February 4th, the Mongols managed to penetrate the city and establish control over part of the city price. After the first Mongol troops entered the city, many of the defenders of Baghdad realized that defeat was inevitable. Daudar also understood this, and on February 4th he tried to leave the city by ship, but he was unable to escape from the city, which is why he was forced to return to Baghdad. Meanwhile, the caliph was still waiting for help from other Muslim states, but he soon realized that no one was going to help the Baghdad garrison. In this situation, the caliph planned to negotiate with the Mongols and, as a gesture of goodwill, handed over Daudar and the commander of the Baghdad garrison to them, which was a rather serious mistake. The fact is that the Mongols only demanded unconditional surrender, and the morale of the Abbasid army was seriously undermined after the capture of the commander of the Baghdad garrison. Many soldiers threw down their weapons and tried to leave the city, which was also a serious mistake, since all the Abbasid soldiers who surrendered were immediately executed. Realizing the hopelessness of the situation, Caliph al-Mustasim decided to stop resistance and surrender to the Mongols. On February 10th, he, along with his family and 3,000 high-ranking officials, surrendered to Hulagu. After the surrender of the caliph, the Baghdad garrison ceased resistance, and on February 13th, the Mongols began plundering the city, which continued until February 20th. Having completed the sack of Baghdad, Hulagu ordered the execution of the caliph and all his associates, after which the entire Abbasid caliphate fell into the hands of the Mongols. It is important to mention that the sack of Baghdad is considered the end of the golden age of Islam, during which the capital of the caliphate was rightfully considered the world center of science and art. As for the Mongol army, after capturing the Abbasid caliphate, it continued its offensive to include new territories in its empire. If you liked this video, be sure to subscribe to my channel and click on the bell so you don't miss new videos.